I'm Andy Gears. I'm leading a team building a mobile game inspired by Super Brothers Sword and Sorcery and based on the Bible. 2 years in, I thought it'd be a great time to look back, reflect on just how far we've come and what lessons we've learnt along the way. The Serpent and the Seed is a game in 4 acts or chapters. This time last year we'd planned and storyboarded Act 1 and we'd prototyped some key little moments in stickman form. We had some little bits of concept art and music for Act 1, a written description of Act 2, and that was basically it. We still didn't have any concrete ideas for the gameplay in Act 2, and really not a clue what was going to happen in Act 3 and beyond. Since then, it's been a real roller coaster of emotions. There's been so many moments where I've come close to despair and wondered if we were ever going to get this game made. But we've also come so very far. It started with Storyboarding Act 2, and by the end of January Dan had sketched out the basics of what the player would be doing as you meet some key Old Testament characters like Noah, Abraham, Moses and David. Are these going to be the ones to crush the head of the serpent? So then I got going prototyping these. I gave myself 1 week to prototype each of the main characters. I really focused on the key interactions that the player would make. For example, after Abraham and Sarah have been waiting 20 years for the son that God had promised them, and after Isaac was finally born, there's this moment where God tells Abraham to go to Mount Moriah and sacrifice his son to test him. We planned out this sequence where the player... Whoa, stop, what are you doing? You can't show them that stuff, it looks dreadful. It's alright, they know it's a prototype. But they'll never want to play the real game if they see that. It looks awful. But prototypes are meant to look awful, it's fine. We planned out this sequence where the player would have to cut down this tree blow by blow and then load the wood onto Isaac's back before ascending the mountain. There were loads of other details in the storyboards, but it was clear that this was going to be the central moment in that sequence. So we really wanted to prototype it early. We really wanted to work out as quickly as possible if any of the things we'd designed were really going to be any good at all, so that we could identify any problems early on and adjust as needed. By May we had this kind of tangled prototype for Act 2 that wasn't particularly coherent or making much sense, and it didn't at all seem to capture that really kind of moody atmosphere that Sword and Sorcery did so well that I was aiming for. But that's really my first big takeaway. Why prototyping early is so valuable. It's a way of kind of taking these abstract ideas that seem so good in your head and making them much more concrete so that you can identify the issues. But I must be honest, I was starting to panic a little, and I wrote this in my journal. I'm feeling firmly in the valley at the moment. Everything is going so much slower than I'd hoped. The very thought of there being an Act 3 to tackle feels overwhelmingly daunting, given how long it's taken us even just to get Act 2 to this point, which is still a long way off done. Help me, God. But by the end of July, we'd had a breakthrough. I'd spent just a few days making some tiny little tweaks to Act 2, just a slight change of perspective for the player, and suddenly it all seemed to click in a way that it never had before. I always knew that the big kind of drama of Act 2 was this search for the seed. Who is going to be the one to fulfill the promise that God gave them in the Garden of Eden, of a seed of Eve who would crush the serpent?
But your seed will crush the head of the serpent.
The breakthrough was to see the parallels between this search and the search for literal seeds that happens in the Garden of Eden. So as well as borrowing some of the existing UI elements from Act 1, I also tweaked some of the dialogue in subtle ways just so that it all pointed in the same direction. Who is going to be the seed? And that's my second big takeaway. Don't despair when things aren't working. Yes, sometimes it's a sign that you need to throw it all away and try a completely different approach. But sometimes you're closer than you think, and all it takes is a subtle change of perspective. During July, I had a particularly nasty tummy bug, and I was spending a lot of time in the smallest room in our flat. While I was there, I suddenly had an epiphany about the main character for our game, and how to frame it for the player in a way that made sense of things. And the script for what would eventually become our teaser trailer kind of arrived almost fully formed in my brain at that moment. We worked again with Daniel Starling, who'd done the concept art for Act 1, and he spent August and September turning my crazy idea into this beautiful animated trailer, and Pocket Gamer even ran an article about it, which was super cool. Delivering the whole game still seems ridiculously far off, but it was really motivating to create this little artifact of a finished thing that we could put out there and start getting feedback on. For me, it's been really helpful as I've looked back on the year and frequently asked myself, what have we actually accomplished? And I can point to that and say, look, we did that. October felt like a really hard month for me, with lots of things coming up related to my other big project, the PrayerMate app. But even whilst I was distracted with that, the rest of the team was busy beavering away on different things. And there's really been this explosion of progress at the end of this year. So Dan finished up the Act 3 storyboards, John has been fleshing out Act 1 so it feels less like a series of storyboards and more like a proper game. Jesse from Port Bishop Hooper has created some absolutely phenomenal music for Act 2, including a first draft of this stunning song about Abraham and Isaac ascending Mount Moriah.
By the tamarisk tree, after Isaac was born to me.
And I've had a couple of really encouraging chats with a few outside observers who could provide some really helpful advice from the vantage point of someone being a bit more removed from the project. And that's my next big takeaway, the importance of surrounding yourself with a team of people, supporters, fans, people who can provide support and encouragement when you need it. It's easier to get through those difficult times when you've got someone to share it with, or a group of people to bounce ideas off, or even if it's just to know that there's still progress being made on the project when you yourself are feeling stuck and unable to move forward. So we're ending 22 with a much more concrete prototype of the bulk of the game. And as I look ahead to next year, I'm hoping that the pace might really start to pick up. We're going to work on creating a complete end-to-end alpha build of the entire game. We're also going to start working with an artist to start creating some proper game content. I'm really excited to see where God leads us in 2023, and I look forward to sharing more in due time. Do subscribe to the channel below if you want to keep up to date on progress. And if you haven't already, do make sure you sign up to the monthly Serpent and the Seed email newsletter and follow us on all our social channels.